What does it mean when we say signs of the times? Whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, you can certainly take that phrase, signs of the times, and if you're a Christian, you might think that it's talking about the end of time as we know it. One group of scientists in 1945, after the creation of the atom bomb, which was used in World War II, developed what is called the doomsday clock as an indicator of the world's ever-increasing vulnerability to catastrophe from nuclear weapons. So whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, certainly the concern about the end of the world, whether it's going to come from atomic warfare or from the second coming of Jesus Christ or the Antichrist or any of these events, signs of the times. What, Peter, do you think it's referring to when Jesus talked about the signs of the times?
That's a huge subject. Of course, Jesus gave this sermon, or maybe a couple of sermons, seeing as there's difference in the way it's recorded in different books. He gives them the signs about what's gonna happen before the end of the world and his coming. Now, some of these signs were quite obvious, and he gave them these warnings about when to leave Jerusalem, things that were very specific to them. But then he's also talking about his coming, and on the one hand he says, of that day no man knows the hour but the Father, and he says, just be faithful. It will come like as in the days of Noah when people aren't expecting it. But then he also does talk about these different things that will happen, and he gives a parable of the fig tree, saying, just like you can watch the fig tree and see how the seasons are going, watch the signs that you know when these things are coming to pass. And of course then in the revelation that he gave to his apostle John, there are some very significant things that happen there that will be impossible to miss,
I think it's interesting. As soon as his disciples in Matthew 24 asked him, what's the sign of your coming? He gives them these answers. He says in verse 4 of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, and the end shall not come yet. For nation shall rise against nation. There will be famines, pestilence, earthquakes in diverse places. And then in verse 8, after saying all of that, he said, these are just the beginning of sorrows. So even these things that he mentions there at the beginning of chapter 24 are apparently not necessarily the signs of the end of time. These are the signs of the beginning of sorrows. But then, as you mentioned, if you go further down all the way to verse 24, which is later on in that same chapter, Matthew 24, he says, for there shall rise false Christs, false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, as in the days of Noah. Now, could this be a sign of the end of time? Jesus refers to as in the days of Noah, so shall be the coming of the Son of Man. Well, what was going on in the days of Noah? It says, for in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. So these people knew not until the flood came. They didn't know it was the end for them until the day it started raining or the waters started gushing out. So if that's what it's going to be like at the end of time, perhaps a lot of the world will not be aware of these words that Jesus said. Maybe the population of Christians in the world will be so small by that time that 90% of the world, 95% of the world will have no clue that we're getting close to the end of time.
Interesting. Of course, in Revelation, there's this talk of these 144,000 being sealed. These are people who are sealed so that the events that take place won't hurt them. Now, you could say, well, maybe that's just representative of all the believers, but it could be that there are not very many believers around at that time.
If you certainly if you went to Europe 50 years ago, there were Christians were much more in abundance than they are now. It seems like there is a wave of atheism. There's a war between Christianity and atheism in the world today, and it seems that the that there are more and more atheists today. If you're an atheist and you're watching this, we'd like to hear from you. If you had been a believer before and are now an atheist, we'd like to know what made you become an atheist, what made you stop believing in God. Because certainly, if you're an atheist, you're not going to be reading the Bible. And as more and more people become atheists in the world, fewer and fewer people will know about these prophecies.
Wow. It's significant how in Noah's time, it got to the point where there were only 8 people who were sealed, who were saved from what came. So it's
a very small part of the population.
Yeah, it's not impossible to imagine that something similar could end up happening again.
Now, this perhaps could be a sign of the times. In the book of, well, Jesus said, he refers back to the book of Daniel and said, makes that reference in Matthew chapter 24. And if you go to Daniel chapter 12, where the angel is talking to Daniel and says, "O Daniel," this is in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, "Oh, shut up the words and seal the book that Daniel was writing, these prophecies, which are principally in Daniel chapter 9, 10, and 11. Seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Knowledge certainly has been increased,
sure,
but who knows? This could be nothing compared to the knowledge in the future.
Yeah.
But perhaps as we begin to understand the prophecies in the book of Daniel, perhaps this is one of the signs of the times that Jesus was talking about.
Right.
Because it says in verse 7, "And I heard a man clothed in linen," apparently an angelic person, "which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time and times and half a time, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, and all these things shall be finished." Boy, time and times and half a time. I wonder if there's any relationship to that and the 3.5 years in the last 7-year prophecy that Daniel spoke of in the earlier chapters of Daniel chapter 9 and 10. And he goes on to say, the angel says, or Daniel says, "And I heard, but I understood not." The angel said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end." So maybe perhaps one of the signs of the time of the end is that we can understand the prophecies in the book of Daniel. We know we're getting close to the end of time as we know it.
Well, certainly in what John calls the last days, the times that even John said that he was living in back then, I guess the time after the first coming of Jesus, Daniel makes a lot of sense, knowing what we know about Jesus' coming, the prophecies that Jesus gave, and then of course John's revelation really helps us understand what's going on in Daniel. And interestingly enough, John was specifically told not to seal his book in Revelation chapter 22, I think it is. So we're in a time when we are reading these things, and they are relevant to us. They are for this age of the world.
So we'd like to know what you think, what the signs of the times are, the things that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 24 or Luke chapter 21, these prophecies of Daniel in Daniel chapter 9, 10, and 11, and then of course the prophecies in the book of Revelation. It's like putting a big puzzle together, and it's like one of those puzzles that has like 1,000 pieces or 500 pieces, and as you put them together, things make sense.
Yeah.
And we are better able to see the signs of the times. Are we living in the end time, and do we see the signs of the times today? If you have any comments about what you've seen, we'd like to hear from you. And thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing to our channel, and we'll see you next time.